We are the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families. We are the only statewide advocacy organization that unites all of the child-serving organizations in the state to advocate for policy for children. Today, this is our annual meeting, and we reached out to the top 3 gubernatorial candidates, and we asked them some questions about children and what their plans were for the children in the state of Louisiana, and we'll be presenting their answers today.
Governor, based on what we know about early brain development and the impact of adverse childhood events, what are your thoughts on improving early childhood well-being and reducing the number of children who enter the child welfare system, many of whom are aged 0 to 2?
Yeah, so the ACEs study that is, I think, incontrovertible, indicates that the more trauma that a really young person sustains, the more difficult their life is going to be, and I certainly accept that. So I will tell you what we're working on through the work that Secretary Marquita Walters and the Department of Children and Family Services are doing. We were the first state in the nation to adopt the quality parenting, it's a QPI, so that we're actually working with the birth mothers but using the foster parents so that they maintain a relationship with the children, but it's a healthier relationship while we give the birth parents the tools that they need to be better parents and take better care of their kids, because 75% of the kids are going to exit foster care and go back to their birth parents. So that's critically important. I will tell you, we've also, Donna, the First Lady, and I, we've initiated Louisiana Fosters, where we are engaging the faith-based community, but also the business community, nonprofit sector, and other stakeholders and advocates to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to support foster parents across the state of Louisiana. We, this year, extended the age of foster care to 21, which is incredibly important. It's also important that we have, for 3 years in a row, set all-time records for adoptions out of the foster care program. So there is no doubt that we have to do more for our children, especially those who are most vulnerable, those who are in households that, at least at times, are dysfunctional, by protecting the children and giving the parents the tools that they need to be successful. But the focus always has to be on doing what is best for the children, which is the legal standard, doing what's in the best interest of the children. We're going to continue to focus on that, and I believe we made considerable progress, but I'm the first to admit we have a ways to go.
The response from Congressman Abraham, who was not able to join us, is the following. My fellow Louisianians, thank you for the opportunity to address these critical issues. The motto of my campaign is Louisiana's families first. That means always doing what's best for our children. There's nothing more important than that. Here's what that means when I'm governor. First, I will increase our investment in our children by making early childhood education a priority. A child's brain is 90% fully formed by age 5. Yet fewer than 7% of in-need children age 0 to 2 years old and less than 33% of 3-year-olds have access to quality childcare in Louisiana. And it's not just childhood education, it's childcare too. Louisiana's economy lost $1.1 billion last year due to absences related to childcare breakdowns. I will grow the investment in early childhood by making it a priority in the state budget and by working closely with local communities, school districts, child care providers, and the business community and nonprofit organizations to secure additional funding. Governor Edwards has touted his recent investment in early childhood, but his initial budget proposal this year didn't include a single new dollar for early childhood education, even though we had 3,500 families on a wait list for services. New funding was only added to the budget after Superintendent of Education John White raised the issue publicly and called for greater prioritization of early childhood. That's not making it a priority.
Many working families struggle to afford high-quality childcare for their children, including both young children and after-school programs for older kids. Do you believe this impacts the economic and workforce development of the state? And if so, what are your plans to help families get the child care they need for their children?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's no doubt. There are many parents who could work, but not for a wage that makes child care affordable. So if they have to pay for child care, which can be extremely expensive, then they're not going to work. The other thing is we know that the child care in many cases needs to be there for the child as well. And so we've taken this very seriously. In this past session, for example, we increased the total annual investment in early childhood education by $20 million. We fully replaced an expiring federal grant that exceeded over $8 million. And the remainder of the $20 million was to secure more seats in quality early childhood education and child care, but also to increase the amount paid for those seats to the 25th percentile, which is something we were required to do by the federal government. But because we're paying more per seat, we're also able now to insist upon more quality, more education. The 80% of a child's brain development happens in the first 5 years. And so you can't wait till a child shows up in kindergarten or first grade in order to engage that child, because by that time, too many of our children are starting school, but with a vocabulary deficit in the thousands of words and other deficits as well, math, and they don't know shapes and colors, days of the week, months of the year, things of that nature. And what we don't do is very well is catch them up. But by the way, no state catches up the kids very well. We just have more than our fair share of kids who start school unprepared. So we know that early childhood education is critically important. That's why we made the additional investment this year, and why the number one investment for new priorities in the second term will be early childhood education for me. We know we have to do a lot more in this area.
Response from Congressman Abraham continued. Second, I will start supporting our teachers. Kids in Louisiana are behind when it comes to reading. In 2017, the percentage of students in Louisiana who performed at or above the NAEP proficient level in reading was just 25%. This is unacceptable. We know that fourth graders who cannot meet NAEP's proficient level in reading today are likely to have trouble catching up and gaining employment later in life. I fully support equipping our teachers with the best tools available to teach our youngest learners how to read. This includes robust professional development opportunities. That being said, I believe we also have to be careful not to let the state get in the way of teachers doing what they know how to do best and tailoring their teaching methods to the unique needs of each student.
Given that 71% of Louisiana third graders cannot read on grade level, would you support legislation and funding to equip educators in kindergarten through third grade with evidence-based reading practices to ensure that Louisiana students become strong readers?
Absolutely. And by the way, we're doing that. So this year we had the first net new investment in higher education in 10 years. But with respect to K through 12 education, we didn't just give the pay raise for teachers and support workers, although that's critically important that we did that. Even though the pay goes to adults, the investment is in the children. But we also increased the block grant portion of the funding formula for K through 12 education by $39 million. This is funding that we provide directly to the districts. And we didn't tell them, okay, now you have to use your $39 million to pay for the related benefits costs for the pay raise. And we took all of that upon the state of Louisiana. So that $39 million is available to the districts to be invested directly in the classroom to the benefit of our students, which is by law where 70% of that additional funding has to go. I am committed to continuing to do that. And when you better fund the school districts and you take that pressure off of them, then you are going to be more successful when you engage them with the evidence-based learning. For example, you were talking about reading, which is so critically important because there's a cost associated every time you change and adopt a new program, because you have to then go in and train the teachers, you have to buy the material and so forth. And so this investment that we're now making again in K through 12 education will facilitate a move towards stronger, more evidence-based programs in reading up through the third grade, as you just mentioned, critically important for our future.
The response from Congressman Abraham continued. Third, I will preserve Medicaid and make sure our children have access to high-quality health care. As a doctor practicing in rural Northeast Louisiana, I have treated thousands of children, many of whom rely on Medicaid to receive the services they need. It's critical that we preserve and strengthen Medicaid for our most vulnerable citizens. The current growth trajectory of Medicaid is unsustainable. The Louisiana Department of Health's budget is growing by a whopping $1 billion per year, and the current administration has offered no solutions on how we can control the cost of the program and fund it going forward. Meanwhile, there is evidence that tens of millions of dollars have been spent on recipients who were not eligible for the program. If we don't get this under control, our children will ultimately pay the price through reduced access to services and a lower quality of care. I will not let that happen.
According to the Georgetown Center for Children and Families, Louisiana currently leads the South in healthcare access for children due to Medicaid expansion. What will you do to ensure that all children continue to have access to healthcare services they need?
Yeah, well, critically important, obviously. We actually have the third highest rate of insured children in the country. We don't just lead the South. We're number 3 in the United States of America. We had that large percentage of our kids insured because of the CHIP program, CHIP, but also we know, and evidence has shown, that when parents sign up for Medicaid expansion, they now know about the Medicaid program and they will sign their children up if they weren't already signed up. That's why we have this huge percentage of our children with health insurance in Louisiana. That is really important, and it also helps us to make sure that we're providing reimbursement to the providers across the state of Louisiana for the care that they deliver. That allows them to deliver more care and keep their doors open. For example, we have not had a single rural hospital close in the state of Louisiana. And that's critically important, not just for the critical care in a hospital emergency room, but more and more often hospitals are running their own outpatient clinics, including pediatric clinics like I saw in DeSoto Parish just this past week. So without the Medicaid expansion strengthening the hospitals, you wouldn't have that pediatric program in DeSoto Parish. And then you would have children with no pediatric program, period, unless they traveled all the way into Shreveport, for example. So we know this is critically important. Expanding Medicaid was the easiest big decision that I will ever make for many, many reasons that I can't get into in the amount of time I have to respond to this question. But there is no doubt our children are benefiting. They're also benefiting because their parents have coverage, and now they can be healthier and they can continue to work and support themselves and their families, whereas before, when they got sick, there was a good chance they would no longer be able to work. And in many cases, quite frankly, people get an opportunity to live because they're being diagnosed with cancer and hypertension and diabetes earlier. They can get the treatment that they need, they can live. That's certainly important for their children as well.
Congressman Abraham's response continued. Fourth, I will reduce taxes on working families. Louisiana has the second highest combined sales tax in the nation as a result of tax increases implemented under Governor Edwards. The sales tax is the most regressive form of taxation since it takes a larger percentage of income from low-income taxpayers than high-income taxpayers. I am committed to lowering the sales tax rate to provide relief for working families. There is nothing more important than our children. You have my word. I will make sure we provide our children the resources they need to succeed. God bless. Ralph Abraham.
Low-income working families pay the highest percentage of their income in state and local taxes, making it harder for them to afford basic necessities. What are your plans to make Louisiana's tax structure more equitable?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have about the 5th lowest combined state and local tax burden in the country. That's what we had when I became governor. I think it's number 5 today. Number 4 or 5, depends on which study you look at. But there is no doubt that, in my opinion, and I said this over the last several years, we're too reliant upon the sales tax, which is regressive by its nature. However, we need to be mindful that in Louisiana, we do have a very generous constitutional exemption that benefits especially those in the lower income area of the state, and that is the sales tax exemption for state sales taxes on groceries, utilities, and for pharmaceutical drugs. Altogether, these exemptions exceed $1 billion off of that what would otherwise be paid in sales tax and certainly benefit the working poor, for example. So I insisted, as we look for ways to address the $2 billion budget deficit that I inherited, the largest ever, that we not touch those exemptions, and we did not. Further, as soon as we were able in 2017, we reduced the sales tax from 1% to 0.45%. At the same time, we granted a 40% increase in the earned income tax credit to try to make work for the working poor. That 40% increase in the earned income tax credit is the largest in the history of our state since the program was created. Now, it is true that the commission set up by the legislature to study and recommend tax reform recommended about 15 or 16 different approaches, things that could be done, all of which were introduced into the legislative sessions, special sessions, and regular sessions, and not a single one was passed by the legislature. And in fact, it was the House of Representatives who refused to do any of that. I'm going to continue to work, however, to make sure that we have a fairer, more equitable tax system in the state of Louisiana, and that's something that I'm never going to give up on, and we're going to have opportunities in the second term as well. But I'm also at the same time going to make sure we protect the exemptions that benefit working poor people, and we're going to protect their earned income tax credit as well.
Do you believe that Louisiana spends enough money on its children? And if not, what are your plans to increase funding?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, the number one new investment in a second term in terms of my priorities will be additional funding for early childhood education. It is critically important that fewer kids start school in a situation where they're not ready to learn. That's how we're going to close the achievement gap. That's how we're going to have the educational outcomes that we want. And that's going to ensure opportunity and prosperity for generations to come. We put a down payment on that this year, $20 million more for early childhood education this year compared to last. But we also invested more than $140 million more in K through 12 education. $101 million of that went to teacher pay and support worker pay, but also a $39 million investment in our districts themselves, 70% of which has to go into the classroom for our kids. And I think it's notable that we had the first net new investment in higher education in 10 years. We had the largest disinvestment in education, in higher education in the country under Governor Bobby Jindal in the 8 years before I became governor. As soon as I became governor, we stabilized the situation, and this year when we were finally able to do so, there is a net new investment. So I believe in investing in things that will benefit our children. I think that that's critically important. I often say it, our children are our most precious natural resource, and we have to do everything reasonably within our capability to nurture them, to educate them, to set them up for success. And when we do that, we're going to have prosperity in Louisiana like we have never seen, and I am confident that we're on a much better path today to making that a reality, and I am committed to ensuring that we continue to move forward and do better over my second term as well.
We actually have a platform for children that we'll be releasing in the next few weeks, and it has 10 key areas that we're asking for specific policy recommendations in those areas. And those are everything from the social emotional development of children, to early child care and education, to child hunger, to family economic stability. So we have a whole lot of issues that we're asking policymakers, including the governor's staff, but also the incoming legislators, to consider as they make laws in the next 4 years.
The Louisiana Policy Institute for Children sees early care and education as such an important issue because we know 2 out of 3 families, either both parents or a single parent, are in the workforce, and we know that it costs employers in Louisiana $618 million because they don't have access to quality early care and education.
One, historically, we have never fully funded services for children and families in Louisiana, and today we are living with the consequences of decisions that were made in the past not to fully fund child well-being and child welfare. And so for 30 years, Louisiana has held the average rank of 49th in the nation for child well-being. That is not an accident. That's because we've not prioritized children. And so when you look at what's going on in Louisiana now and in the rest of the country, we have got to find a way to fund services to meet the needs of children, because what we know today about the condition of Louisiana is it's a product of what we did not do in the past. And when we look into the future, what we will get in the future is a consequence of what we do with and for our children today.
So Families in Need of Services is a pre-trial intervention program for kids who have demonstrated some red flag behaviors that we don't want to get further involved in the juvenile justice system. So Families in Need of Services is a program where an offense officer like myself will work with the family to provide case management to help them access services that can help ameliorate some of the problems at home, at school.
What would additional state support mean for those families?
Oh, that would mean many more services that I could provide for them. We need access to mentoring programs, and we need after-school programs. We need support for sports activities and arts and crafts. Any type of funding that would go towards children's Medicaid would help us provide services for those families to keep kids out of the juvenile justice system.
Children in poverty oftentimes face have issues around just simply being hungry, unable to get nourishing food to feed their bodies to be healthy. Their families are challenged with affording the most very basics to human life, like food, like medicine. But also families with parents that are participating in the workforce, accessing high-quality childcare is also a barrier. Parents need to know that they have a safe place for their children where they can grow and thrive and be kindergarten ready. And oftentimes families that are facing issues around poverty are highly challenged in accessing high-quality childcare.
We know that children in Louisiana suffer greatly from poverty. We know 1 out of 3 children live in poverty in the state of Louisiana, and 1 out of 2 black children live in poverty in Louisiana. So focusing the changes that we need to see in Louisiana and the policies that we need to enact, children must be at the center of everything that we discuss in this state.
For us, it's childcare and the availability of funding for our families in need to afford quality childcare, especially in our rural parishes. Right now, there just simply aren't enough funded slots for the need.
Talk a little bit about Louisiana's rural parishes.
So in our rural parishes, it's really about resources and connecting families to the resources they need. There are so many wonderful child care providers out there, but unless we can fully fund CCAP right now and get those families off the wait list, we're seeing businesses go out of business because they're simply not able to continue until that funding comes through.
In Louisiana, we have some of the highest rates of childhood poverty and women living in poverty, the numbers of single moms, and so anything that the state can do to reduce those numbers and improve the conditions in which women are raising their families is extremely important.
Give us an example of what you've seen in terms of the pressures that women are under in Louisiana.
Well, I think one of the biggest barriers to women is really not having, the workplace kind of supports that they need to be able to earn a living wage and to, provide for their families. So things like increasing the child care assistance funding would go a long way to help women be able to rejoin the workforce after, having children, increasing funding for early childhood education, providing paid family leave policies that would allow women to be able to take time off to welcome a new baby into her life or to care for an aging parent or a sick loved one would be important.
The Louisiana Center for Development and Learning, we're focusing on a fundamental core skill that every child in this state needs, and that's literacy, comprehension, fluency, and being able to serve as the core of their educational attainment and success. With our state partners and with state support, we really believe we're fundamental to addressing many of the challenges our families across the state face every day, economic, socioeconomic, and otherwise. And what we want to do is work with our state partners to increase the percentage of third graders who are reading on grade level, because research tells us that's a fundamental measure for the success of our economy and our state for generations to come.
In Southwest Louisiana, families are having to choose between whether to send their children to school fed or whether their children are going to be clothed today, whether they are going to eat, which meals they're going to miss, they don't have the money for their medical cost. They don't, the uniforms that we require for their schools. It is just the choices that the families are having to make are just, they're putting everyone in a terrible position. So we really just need the help to help these families so they don't have to make these decisions and they can help their children grow. And the better we are nurturing these children when they're young, the better they're going to be when they grow up. And it just is a snowball effect. If we could just go upward instead of continuing to go backward, I think that would just be great.
We really focus on is the types of investments that the state needs to make to have that return on investment. Right now in the state of Louisiana, we have the lowest investment in children, and we have the highest investment on higher education and workforce development and all of those in the prison system as well. If we actually invested the money at the beginning of children's lives, we actually could reduce the amount that we spend at the back end.
People in Louisiana get tired of hearing we're ranked 49th, we're ranked 50th, we're ranked 45th. Those are the consequences of not investing in the lives of children. Children grow up into adulthood, and the adults create the current environment so that if we refuse to care for kids in a way that fully invests in their well-being, that uses resources wisely to ensure that all of Louisiana has an opportunity for a better future, then we're shortchanging ourselves.
If people have questions, like more information, what should they do?
Absolutely. Visit our website at louisianapartnership.org. And we have a lot of information. We have a lot of advocacy information. And we have a lot of policy reports from the state that we are pushing out to our folks.